I've known you for almost 2 decades, but I don't know much about your background. So I definitely want to kind of go to the origin story and
Sure,
ask you, where were you born? What was your
sure.
family life like? Those types of things. So if you just want to go back to the
Okay.
beginning, talk about those things.
Sure. Let's see. I was born in Manila, Philippines, and I immigrated over here with the family around when I was 4. And originally, we stayed with my aunt's family in Long Island. They were the ones that I guess sponsored our family, and then we moved to Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, uh, by the time I was 5. So, and then we kind of stayed in Manhattan till I was in my teens. Then my family was able to, the whole like immigrant story. They were able to save up money, and we got a house, and we moved into a house in Westchester, and then from there, high school is in the Bronx, and then college. I went originally first to Binghamton, and then from Binghamton to City University. And in that transition between Binghamton and City University is where I met up with Tom Carl, right? But before that, I would say that like I got into martial arts around college years. So that's really like one of the big things there. Um, in regards to my immigration, like into my history, I would say that it's very common what we went through. I think I was just re-listening to Tom Carl's interview with you, and we had the same kind of upbringing where my parents felt like they shouldn't speak to us in English. I mean, in Tagalog. So we were spoken only in English, and they tried to make us speak in English only. So that part of like, so that part is very common, when we were growing up, when we were in Manhattan, we were in the upper Manhattan, which wasn't like the best place, but it wasn't like the worst place. It was very in between. We had, it was in Spanish Harlem around that area. Um, I faced a couple of like difficult racist things going up, bullying, but they're not too bad. I mean, I think that considering I was one of the few Asians, it was not as bad as it could have been. I kind of attribute that to being lucky and meeting the right friends that I've had pretty much since grade school. I still have now. And so those guys, like, they really, they accepted me as their own. And, maybe a lot of it is also, I was Filipino. So it's not as Asian as my Chinese and Korean counterparts. So and I do remember them getting a lot of flack when I was growing up, but not not as much as I received. But I did receive like some, and I mean I remember growing up, and luckily we had a lot of like I had family here. So even though we had problems, like I could turn to my cousins, and uh technically I was the second oldest. So my oldest cousin, like, usually went from my little brothers getting and my little cousins getting into trouble, them calling up to their older cousins, then ended up to me. And then if I couldn't solve the problem, then it was my oldest cousin that kind of, we all fought together. So that's kind of how we grew up. Um, let's see. Then, and honestly, my parents really tried to give us the best that they could. And from there, I went to college, and we had I didn't really want for anything. Like my uh like my if my if I asked for anything, my dad would give it to me. That also could be because I was also the oldest son. So, I have that in the Filipino culture of like the oldest son kind of gets what he wants. right? So like, for instance, if somebody wanted to borrow the car, I asked for it to get the car. And then also, like I would get a car, and like if I wanted to go down to Florida, I could go down to Florida with that car, and really no questions asked. So I kind of grew up in that sense of like of the Filipino culture that way, and then really it was in college where I started to kind of make an adjustment, like where I thought I kind of made a decision that, hey, things should be a little bit tougher. Like um, I met up with various groups, especially in the Chinese community, and they're just like tough guys. Like I met like a lot of Muay Thai, like Thai guys, and they're tough guys. And I was like, oh, I'd like to be part of that tough guy culture, right? Um, so I kind of did that, and that's when I started getting to martial arts. Like before that, my parents didn't do martial arts. I was more into academics, and then I went into martial arts, and luckily I was able to, I did Taekwondo, I did Wing Chun. There's a guy that did Tai Chi there that like was like a combative form of it. And then really where I got in more into martial arts was when I met up with this Chinese group, and one of their guys was a kickboxer that went to like Hong Kong to fight, and I was introduced to him, and we were able to like spar all the time. So that's really where I kind of like started getting into it. But culturally, even though I knew I was Filipino, I associated myself more with the Chinese, because when we were growing up, there was no one in my peers that was Filipino. They're mostly like I said, if there's an Asian group, it was mostly Chinese or Korean. Like that's really where I learned about being Asian, was that like Chinese Asian. So for me, for a very long time, I really thought I was I was more leaning towards my Chinese side of the Filipino mix, because we do have some Chinese somewhere in like our history, right? And it wasn't until after I got to SUNY Binghamton where I started hanging out interestingly enough, hanging out with a Chinese person that knew the Atienzas, right? And they're the ones that mentioned like, oh, there's these three brothers, and they didn't say Filipino martial arts, but they're Filipino and they did martial arts and they're very good at it. And I still didn't connect with them at that time. It was only when I moved back into the city that another Filipino or half Filipino friend of mine mentioned like, hey, you should go meet these brothers.
So going back to Tuhon Leo about that again, thank you for sharing all those things. I wanted to make sure that I came into this interview with a kind of a blank slate, and I didn't know that you were actually an immigrant from the Philippines. How old were you when you moved here again?
Four.
4. That's right. Okay, so 4 years old. Did you spoke some Tagalog when you came in, but you
Yeah,
mentioned
I was
before,
like, again, I was as fluent as a 4-year-old. And then pretty much like, when I met my cousins in Long Island, I was still fluent, and like we didn't understand each other. It was only when we started going to school when I was 5, which is kindergarten, that, my parents were like, no speaking Tagalog, English only. And, and from there, like I've gotten that same kind of like upbringing where I could understand Tagalog, but I cannot speak Tagalog unless it's like a very basic level, right? So I could speak Tagalog, but it's just very basic. And even now, like I'm trying to relearn it, and it's still very basic.
I was really curious about what your childhood was like. Like, what was it like to grow up going from a foreign country like the Philippines, coming here, dealing with some of the racism? But, what was your overall childhood like
I mean,
back in those days?
overall we were very, I think again, this is a very Filipino thing, but we were very happy. Like, there's no like, like I look at now at other cultures, and like generally Filipinos are very thankful for what they have, whether it's very minimal to very wealthy. We're very thankful. When we were growing up in Manhattan, like we had a 1 bedroom apartment for 5 people, right? And so, you know, it was my parents, my siblings, all in one, all in one room. Sometimes we'd have visiting relatives that were also like coming over, so they would have the living room, and that was very common growing up, like just having a lot of family going in and out, right? And again, my family's focus was more on academics. Like they're like, hey, study, 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 get that done. There was not a lot of like, I wanted to do martial arts because, again, growing up, Channel 5, 3 p.m., martial, kung fu movies. That's what I grew up with. And that's what I always played around with my friends. And, even like growing up with other people that were racist, there was always that like, oh, does he know karate? Does he know kung fu? And I kind of use that as my advantage for like having to deal with certain things. I remember even back then, like making like paper throwing stars and like selling them, and the nunchucks. We had the nunchucks, all those things growing up, but no real like we didn't we just didn't really have the money to send me to martial arts.
As you got older, when you started going through high school, you're very academic centric. Were you into any sports? Were you anything like that?
Yeah, and then eventually I went into like track and field. So I was one of the things, I was very sickly growing up. I had asthma as a kid. And so I wasn't, very physical until one day, they were doing a phys ed class and they had to do like all these, like, there's like a president's test, I think at that time there, the government was running those things. And I scored well enough that the track coach was like, hey, you should do track. And, and actually I attribute running track to fixing my asthma.
Cool.
So it's kind of like contraindicate, like there's like, the more I ran, the less I had my asthma. So that kind of like moved me towards the more physical centric side.
100%. No, that's really cool. What events did you run in track?
I did mostly sprints. Like, the most I did was a mile, but I was really like 400s. I did a lot of 4x2, like fours, 4x4s, 4x2s, or the 40. Also, I was a small frame, so I was like always put in with like, there's weight classes up to a certain point when you're growing up, and even there, I was like more on the lower side of the weight classes. So generally, I was taller than a lot of people I was in that weight class, but I was not as heavy. So so it kind of helped me out in that way.
Yeah.
And then, when I went to college, I also continued running. But when I got to college, like running was a lot more it was a lot more difficult. Right. So it was now you're a small, like a big fish in a bigger pond, so it was more difficult. And then I also started doing martial arts more in college. So that's why I kind of moved away from continuing on to track.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing that. That's another thing I didn't know about you. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I got to ask that. So I want to kind of fast forward a little bit as you spoke about yourself going to high school and college. You started to steer more away from the academics. And this has really struck me what you said. You thought things needed to be tougher.
Yeah.
I'm really curious what that means. Like, one, what did you mean by that? And also, what drove you to that?
Well, like I said, I think that I really had, I won't say fairy tale life, but like I got a lot of the things that I wanted. My father just, my parents gave it to me. I didn't really want for anything. It's like we had cars. It's not like, when I look at like other friends, they didn't have vehicles. I had vehicles. I had like, you know, um, and a lot of that is my parents just not letting me know, like, like, hey, this is reality. Like, this is money and this is what you have to do with it. They're just giving me stuff. So, but when I went to college, I really saw that, hey, there's like, your mind now is like really opening up, and now you're not involved with just your family. Now you're like, and so I'm really understanding things. And like, my first sociology class blew my mind. Like the way they explain, like, this is like this is like how the world runs. And I was like, that's not how the world. I'm like, nope, this is how the world runs. Even though we blind ourselves somewhat to like how the machine moves, this is like, like, yeah, money, like, you are paid for what you're trying to do. Like, like, it's not given to you. You have to earn it. Right. Like, uh, and then also like we believe that it's them like uh meritocracy, but like it's somewhat like that, but it's not really. Like, yes, it's much as like what you do, but it's also like the circumstances. So a lot of real things were happening, like where I was opening up my eyes, and then I kind of thought about it, like I was not really tough, or I was not around a lot of tough people. And but people I did meet, they were tough, and they were like, they were so for instance, I remember in we were out in, so this is still in college in Binghamton. We're It was a bunch of me and my friends, Chinese friends, and we were in a car getting gas. And I guess somebody drove by, or somebody in another vehicle was there filling up as well. And there was like some racist interaction. And my friends all jumped out of the vehicle. They're all like, they're all ready. And like, I didn't jump out. Right. And then afterwards, nothing happened. But then my friends came up to me and said, like, my friend David, you know, came up to me, and I remember him saying, like, he was like, dude, like, if your brothers jump out, you have to jump out. Like, everybody has to come out. Everybody has to fight. And I was like, I didn't even know it was a fight. I was like, I wasn't tracking any of those things. Yeah, like, that's one of the protocols. If guys are out, then you step out too. You don't just sit in the car. That's one of your jobs, right? As a male, right? So
Interesting.
that was like first part about it, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm getting that understanding of like being tough, and really speaking up for yourself. Like in college, you speak up for yourself, or at least not back then. You're taught now to start speaking up for yourself. Where culturally, you keep your head down, right? You keep your head down and your eyes down, and you just kind of get things done, right? But now, like in college, and the friends I'm meeting are like, hey, like, you don't have to like take anything. Like, you can be yourself and not be put down.
So you were speaking, Tuhon Leo, regarding your upbringing, and again, I feel this kinship with you in that it reminds me of my childhood. I was a kuya, I was the eldest of
Mhm.
my family, and I never really, I had everything that I needed, but again, there was this sense of longing for something deep within me that I had to be more aggressive. I needed to be more capable. I needed to be tougher. And so when you hung out with these, I think you said they were these Chinese friends of yours, they kind of exposed you
Mhm.
to this world of martial arts and being a tough guy and all these different things. In that space of time, were there any, is it safe to say that there was a part of you that longed for that type of masculine aggression even when you were a kid? Can you kind of trace it back to then? Was
Uh,
that a feeling you had earlier on, or is that something that was
I
cultivated purely in college?
I think I've always so when I was growing up, but it more manifested again, I think, while I was in college. But I did have a lot of rage growing up, and again, that could be a lot of different factors, like, being one of the few Asians, and then, you know, going through certain racist like interactions with people, um, and then now really in college being able to vent it out. But I had a lot of rage, like even for my size. I was like lifting a lot more than I like people thought I should be able to, like people were like accusing me of doing steroids, like all these things. But I was still, I just had like a lot of pent up like aggression, I think. Um, and I never really got to, to, to like really release it outside of running. And running is more like, uh, is more of therapeutic where you're just getting tired. You're just getting exhausted from running, but like nothing really like for me, like punching anything, like I really think like you should punch stuff. Like it helps you
100%.
get rid of like some, some like negative stuff. Like, good like bag session always can help a lot. So yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I just found that in college I was able to, really express it more. Right.
Right, right. And so, like around this time, you were mentioning that this is where you're really diving into martial arts, kickboxing. You mentioned Tai Chi. You
Mm,
mentioned obviously
mm,
a healthy place, as you mentioned, to really cultivate that aggression and that rage.
mm.
When you start, I want to now segue to time when you were starting to meet the Atienzas, and
Right.
you've already spoken about this on the firesides a bit. But I would really love to hear it from you in this interview, how you make that connection, and also as you make that connection, your first session. I know this story. Some people might know this story,
Right.
but your first time meeting Tuan Carl Manang Bush, what that was like, and how
Sure.
that really reframed your mindset, not just in terms of martial arts, but also, from what I had to gather, they really took you in eventually
Right.
as like
Yeah.
for the family. Like, how did that basically pull you out of your your young rage and all those things, and then really cultivate that with his family?
Okay. Sure. So again, like from college, I met a group of Chinese uh, tough guys, and they were hanging out, like they were in the gangs, and so I was part of that culture, right? I was part of that culture. So at that time, I'm still not doing Filipino martial arts. What I do know is that I hung out a lot of pool halls, right? And I know like pool halls, you can throw balls and there's sticks there. So I was like, hey, there's like sticks. I should really learn how to use a stick or weapons, right? And then that kind of led me to Filipino martial arts. And I was like, oh, I should learn how to do Filipino martial arts. And and at that time, so I went in and I took a Pikiti class. Right? I took a Pikiti because that was one of the biggest things in you look up uh Filipino martial arts at that time frame, and it was a lot of it was Pikiti. Uh, they're well known and they're easy to find. And the problem, so again, nothing against the system, but like the people I met there, they were they were pretty much jerks. Like I went in and they're like, oh, like they gave me a hard time, and more about like they weren't friendly, they weren't like welcoming, not like our group, or very I think like our group is like very welcoming. They had a lot of like, oh, you want to be a badass? And I was like, I guess, and so I took classes with them and we were doing the drills. And, again, I didn't stay too long because I ended up meeting with the Atienzas, but like, we were doing drills and I remember doing the drill and like, it was a basic, like, so they would teach you they were not even the hourglass. It was the male and female triangle. Right. So I was learning that. And I was also learning, I had a wooden knife and I would do like the thrust slash, thrust pulling out slash. And I remember doing that. And I remember doing that and showing my dad. And my dad was watching me do it like in the backyard. And he was like, what are you doing? I was like, oh, this is how you fight. And I was like, this is how you fight. And he was like, and I told him I was doing the triangle. And again, I didn't stay long. So I didn't know what, like, this is what they told me that this is what it was for. This is our footwork. And then my dad was like, why would you do that? Like, you're stuck inside this triangle. And I was like, no, this is what it is. And they're like, it's like, well, why don't I just punch you when you get to the top of the triangle? And I was like, and in my head, I was like, why can't you do that? Like, I was like, I don't, like, so I was like, oh, and so I was really kind of getting disillusioned because like, here we are in class and I'm just learning drills. And the drills, when faced off against somebody that wasn't part of the system, I was having I was getting conflicts. I was like, oh, this guy could hit me, and like, why aren't you doing what we were supposed to be doing, right? And at that time, at the same time, I met up with a friend, like my roommate's friend was like, he knew I was doing FMA, and he was like, hey, you should meet up with these guys, which were the Atienzas. And you should really like, they're the guys. So I was like, sure, why not? I'm not really digging where I was at, you know, and I wasn't really digging where I was at. And then from there, I met with Tuhon Carl in '93. I remember it was '93, and we met at the Filipino Independence Day Parade, right? And we got introduced by my friends, and then and it was very casual. It was very casual. Tuhon Carl has a story, of course, like like he knew something was different because I was wearing a turtleneck at that time, and it was summer. But I was with the Asian, like I was the palest like Filipino he's seen at that time. Um, and I met up with them, and then he was like, "Hey, yeah, we'll meet up a week later or something, and just come to my place." Right. And so from there, I made an appointment to meet up with him, and it was in the Union Square area at that apartment. And the first thing, was like, I kind of met up with his father first. Like his father was the one that answered, and then like Tuhon Carl came out, and like, oh, and in some ways I thought, for some reason, I thought that I might be training with Tito Butch, but then it was like, no, you're gonna train with my son. And I was like, which was Carl, of course, and Tuhon Carl. And I was like, yeah, that's the guy I met, so yes. But then at the same time, like, I was like, but this is the guy I'm gonna train with. And I was like, I don't know, like, is he any good? Like everybody I met before were much older to train with, and he was my age or like younger than me, I think, younger than me. And I was like, well, okay, so what are we going to learn? And then like, can you show me something? And I think I said like, can I show you something? And he was like, yeah, what would you do if I did this? And back then I used to carry a little pipe. So I just like pulled out the pipe and just swung at him. And I remember taking like a couple of swings, and then that was it. Like I remember missing him and then being on the floor. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. I think that's pretty good. I'll keep coming, So that was like really the start of it, where we met up. And during that time frame, like they kind of put me through a modified like program, which was 3 months to see if I would stick around, um and if they could influence me, because they knew who I used to hang out with. And it was a good time, because like at that time, like we are doing a lot of training. It was very physical, which I really liked. And then also, like every time there was a break, Tito Butch was there, and like he would talk to us about culture. Like he would show me books, and like there's a lot of conflict, because this was not culture that I grew up with. Like even though it's Filipino, it was not the Filipino like I grew up with, like which is Catholic background. Like this is like why you wear this. So it was very counter colonialism, like so like the talk about like why we actually wear barongs and all that stuff. Where I grew up like, oh, barong is a status symbol, when you know when it's really like, hey, they made us wear it because they wanted to make sure that we didn't have weapons, you know. So even as I was training with Tuhon Carl and his father, and learning all this stuff, I was also getting a lot of like uh flack from my parents, for my dad, because of the way I would always just bring that culture back to the house. And he was like, no, that's not what it is. And I'm like, no, it is like that. And like, we're getting into arguments that way. But it was still a good time of always constantly training with the Atienza. And from there I met his brothers, they would show up every once in a while. Um, and we got to hang out with them. And it was a good time, because we're the same age. We like eventually Tuhon Carl and I even went to the same school. We even like stayed at an apartment till we roomed together. Uh, and one of the things we had like the same likes where we rode motorcycles. That was our big thing back then. So so a lot of it was like training, school, and motorcycles. I mean, that was like all of our time. Like, and so for a long time it was like that. And not, back, and also like, growing up in the city, partying. So it was a good time to really cultivate the martial arts, but build that family and friendship.
That's really cool because hearing the impact of the Chinese community, this Chinese
Mm.
group that you were hanging out with, some of which were tough guys, gang affiliated, all that,
Mhm.
and then going to this other world almost where you're with these Filipinos now who are
Right.
revealing this entire new world to you. I was always curious about this, and I hope I can ask this of you. But was there any there was conflict between obviously your upbringing with your dad and what you were bringing back from the
Mhm.
Atienza household? Was there any conflict with the guys you were hanging with going and hanging out with the Atienzas? Was there any?
No, they are built on the fact that they are taking advantage of 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 kids that have need. The first need is like protection, money, and really when I was hanging out with them, my need was only for like what I didn't know back then was like for a brotherhood or tribe, like having that group, right? I didn't have that, and but I didn't need their money. Like they would hand out money, but I didn't need their money. I didn't need a place to stay. So like a lot of times I would meet up with them at certain times, like mostly in the evenings or certain times of the day, but I would meet up with them and then be able to leave. Like, whereas the guys that were there, they had to stay at their apartments that were funded by those groups, you know. So and they lived off of that money. Like they lived off of the food that was given to them by those groups where I didn't have to. So I was lucky in that way. And even my the bosses, the big brothers, which they call Dailo, uh, they kind of knew that of me. They're like, oh yeah, like they he can go and do whatever. And so I was always very separate from them in a way, which was also a good thing for them because I I gave them another facet of American life that they didn't they didn't have, right? Because it was very like Chinese specific to them, right? So I was able to go out and do different things.
Gotcha, gotcha. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I was wondering because again, you basically are talking. You're living between two tribes, essentially,
Right.
in a way, right?
Yeah.
And you have maybe three tribes. You have your family
Three
life.
tribes because of my family.
Yeah, right. You have your family. You got the Chinese side, and you got the Atienzas, and now you have to really pick one. And so now going into the new chapter of your life, going with the Atienzas, and I know that Atienza Kali has obviously changed my life in so many ways. What aside from just having a brotherhood that you now found and a social community that was positive in your life, can you recall any of the more poignant moments where you realized, hey, this Atienza family, this tribe now, this is really what I want? And was there anything memorable at that time that really made you realize, hey, this is it for me. The Atienza tribe is what I want.
I mean, I think I've always been that way from the very beginning because I remember like one of the things that uh Tito Butch told me was that he said like and it echoes from my own father when he did find out that I was doing stuff like that was that the gangs are not your family. They're there to take advantage of those things. Like it's all propaganda and that's one of the things like people will sell you out like I was very paranoid when I was around them as well because even though you're part of this group, they did a lot of like mind games and like we would beat people up even in our own group. We would hurt people in our own group, and a lot of that was just to like sort of like to keep a chain of command, but also to mess with people's heads. Like you don't know. So I remember always being on edge, as I got deeper into it, because I also met other non-Chinese that were there, and they didn't have good experiences as it got further into it, so I was always on edge about those things. Like near the end of it, I was always worried that like something would happen. Like I didn't like being like, if we had to sit in a booth, I didn't want to sit between all these guys, you know, stuff like that. So, um, and Tito Butch would say that like they are not there to be your family, your tribe, like they're taking advantage of you. They want something. Now, he didn't explain what all the other things are, but like I knew from like training with Don Carl and his brothers, like this is it. This is like, but again, we're still kind of like building up like the meaning of tribe. Like for us, it was like just hanging out, and I started applying like the things that I believe tribe meant or brotherhood meant to like not applying, but I was seeing it in the Atienza groups, right? Like don't fuck around with each other's like that was a big thing. Like so I grew up where like especially in the Latino community that I also grew up in, like and somewhat the Filipinos that I did meet at the time, like, there's a lot of like messing around with each other's girlfriends. Like it was very like, like there was no boundaries, right? Like, like people might steal from your own, like, if you had friends, you brought them in, like they might steal from you. Where when I met the Atienzas, it wasn't like that. And the groups that they were with, it wasn't like that, So it kind of fostered that like tribe mentality. And then really where I think like the change happened is when we met the Psyops, right? So like once that LOT kind of filtered into what we were doing, like, that like that was it. Like that like elevated what we were doing to even higher like standards. Where before it was just like, hey, friends fight, like there was goals, but it wasn't very organized. We just knew like this was the right thing to do or honorable thing to do. But why? So where
So,
psychology really did that.
yeah, psychology, and that's fantastic. I wanted to, for those listeners who don't know, do you mind kind of going into what
Mhm.
psychology is for the people out there who may not
Sure.
understand?
So Psych LOT is like the real term is like Psych LOT according to Pamana Tuhon, like logical order of thinking according to Pamana Tuhon, and I think that's even trademarked someplace. But like it's just a way of thinking of like problem solving, and it's it's almost too complex to like to explain. It's more than some people kind of say it's critical thinking, but it's more than that, and it's very much what problem solving is to me, right? So having goals and all those things. And once we started applying that to like to what we were doing in Atienza, I really thought like, man, it's like it solidified everything. So we kind of like, and then sitting at Pamanaton's table also solidified everything. So not only with I'm gonna move back, but like bikes and martial arts weren't the only thing that Tuan Carl and I had in common. Like we were also very much into the spiritual side of things, not like spiritual as in religion, but spiritual like energy. And we're doing like all these things. Like we would have discussions about that in between training and all that stuff. Like once we got to Pamanatohon, it just kind of like made its way right through. Like it was like one easy transition, and it just never stopped. So for me, I think that's where like I was like, hey, this is it. Like now that being said, LOT is not something you just you learn it and then you're a master. Like it's, I am still making mistakes and but now I really try to apply everything through that like style filter and try to figure things out, like, with the Atienza, with the Atienza as well,
100%.
so,
No, yeah,
yeah,
that's a great breakdown. I love that breakdown. So, and thank you for that, because I know there's a lot of
mhm,
people from the last few videos that it was mentioned, but not everybody was
right,
able to find out what that meant. So, thank you so much for sharing that, Tuan. And also, so now I want to fast forward in the time frame a little bit. So now you're with the Atienza group, and now you're seeing Atienza Kali kind of evolve into what it is now.
right,
I want to really briefly touch upon, your journey in the system as it's evolved since we celebrated our 20-year
yeah,
anniversary this past
right.
fall. What are some of the more notable, I would say changes, but evolutions that you've seen since your time in the early stages of the system and
Yeah.
now seeing it evolve on this global scale?
Mhm. Well, again, I think so originally we came out, we were just fighting. We were like, hey, it's about fighting, right? And then like, and then we met and then we were just fighting ourselves, right? Like that's who we trained with. And then uh we the Tuhon Call reconnected with the PSYOPs, and then we went to media and we were sparring there. And like, when we first were going there, we thought we were going to be like fighting, like really like, our idea was like stick fighting and it's going to be no holds barred. And like, and then they came out with action flex and that was so new to us. Like, we were like, oh my gosh. And like, and, uh, and even then, like the lessons that I can't stress enough about, like the lessons I was learning, which I only know now, like that's part of LOT is like you might hear it, but it's not until you're really like get more experience in it, like you don't know all these lessons. And there was so many lessons even from there that I look back upon, like being prepared, like, like now, like I'm the prototypical of 20 something year old just walking in like an idiot, not knowing what's happening, like knowing only first order of effects stuff. But now, like I know, like, hey, like why are we here? What is the goal? Like I'm not just spitting things out, right? Like there's like purposes to things. Um, and so we had that part. So and then from there, like Don Carl was like tasked with like well, a big thing there was also like the death of Tito Butch. That was a big thing. And I want to touch on that a little bit because at the funeral, I thought that one of the most impactful things I remember from the funeral of Tito Butch was that when Tom Carl gave his speech, his eulogy, he said that his dad was his hero, right? And I was like, I mean, at this time, I'm taking in like things are making more. I'm trying to be more understanding of things, and to really like hear somebody say that, like I never really heard somebody say like my father was my hero. Like you hear about it, like, oh, like in school, like, oh, I want to, and kids draw like, who's your hero? My dad, Abraham Lincoln, all these things. But to hear an adult say it, like that was like a big thing. And I was always like, wow, it's like, is my dad my hero? Like now he is, like, cause now again, like through LOT and through experience, I know all the things that he's done. But at that time frame, I didn't think my dad was my hero, at that time. Like I'm like, and to hear Phone Call say that, it was big. And I was like, wow, like what does that mean? So even there, I was like, what does that mean to be a man, to be a father? Was like that was like my first I was like, that's pretty intense. So that was like a moment that definitely stands out in my mind in Atienza Kali and in my own development in Atienza Kali. And then from there, we met the Sox and in the Sox, we started building, they, get out there. The first thing we did was like build evolutions under the guidance of Pamanton. Like he said, hey, make this, like, this is how you teach the masses, because we didn't have instructors. It was just really Don Carl, and I was his assistant. That was it. Like I wasn't an instructor. I was just his assistant. It was just Don Carl going out there all the time and his brothers, um, and And then from there, the system starts growing. We interact with the military. All these things are happening. And then really where, we started getting more into I don't know if Carl talked about it, but really what's considered like the Sonic Black program, which the highest levels of like training with the blade. And then from there, like the system kind of like really started developing now more. Now because through LOT, like what was the purpose of all these things? And now really starting like trying to okay, so we did this thing and now we had evolutions, and the purpose of evolutions was originally it was so that, we just Tuhon Carl just took all the moves and he put them together that we did already. But it was really so that it's to teach people without having an instructor there, so that they have something, a drill, something to remember. Right. But then later on, as the system evolved, Tuhon Carl, we would put together tests, and which eventually became our tens, our standards. And we realized the evolutions weren't teaching people really how to fight. And we thought it did, we thought it did, this is how we did it. But then, but that was also because we did all these other reps of fighting. So then even understanding that part, now we're back to it. Now it's almost come full circle where we're doing attack recover sets, which is still kind of has a small portion of a drill, but now they're really learning how to fight or defend, really counter and stuff like that. And then putting that with all the information that they got over the years, which is now the attack recover, all these things kind of solidifying. It's great. And it pushes me because, people are coming in and they're good. They're getting better and better in a shorter time frame, and, one of the things I think with if you're an Atienza Kali, you want to excel. You want to be the guy that always wins. Right. So when you're seeing all these guys that are getting better, I think that it pushes you as well. So that's what happens with me. I'm pushing here and, and then at the same time, so now I'm a full instructor. At the same time, now I'm getting married. The system evolves the system is evolving with the members, where before, there wasn't that many families because we're all in our 20s. Now, all of a sudden, now we have families, and now and the system evolves with that. Where in your 20s, you had a lot of time and you trained 5 days a week sometimes. And now families are around or even not families, but serious relationships. And now you're not training 5 days a week. Now, especially now with a family, you're lucky if you train an hour, half an hour a day, if you're, and then you're trying to figure that part out. So the system evolves that way. And, Tuhon Carl, I'm very lucky to be privy to to be part of that circle where I see all the things that the system has to go through. And, it's very interesting to see the track that it's gone through.
That's really awesome. Yeah. Cause I mean, I can only imagine because I came in right when you all hit the public.
Right.
So my perspective, I'm part of that first generation where I was out across the floor in Woodbridge, New Jersey. I was part of that whole generation in Tuan Daryl's backyard and then Tuhon Carl's garage. I was part of that, but you really came from it before it was even called Atienza Kali, if I'm not mistaken. It really was.
Yeah, it was called Katipunan ng Kalis. We had shirts. I wish, looking back, I wish I had kept those shirts, but that's what it was called. It wasn't called Atienza Kali. It was Katipunan ng Kalis, K and K. So it's still part of I think that was Tito Butch's influence on that, because it was part of the KKK, history part, So it was very cool. And I was like, but now where it is, it's night and day. And now, of course, like Tuhon Carl makes blades. All these things are just things that add to the depth of the system and the organization.
100%, 100%. And so, what was really powerful what we just said earlier, we were speaking about the evolution of the, so it's not just the system, but really your life in the system, your lifestyle in the system
Mm.
was family. And I know we only have a little bit more time, but I do want to touch upon that. I would love to talk about your role as a dad now. Because when I first met you, you weren't a dad and
Right.
not
Yep.
married.
And
Now you're married with
yeah, and
kids.
like,
Yeah.
I don't think that you understand of a parent until you become a parent, you know?
Amen.
And
Amen. Yeah.
now with the LOT, I can understand all the things that my parents were doing before, like because I didn't have LOT, I might not have really, I really feel the depth of what they've done, because of like the filters I can look through LOT. So I'm very thankful for everything that they've done. And like, now I try to emulate it, but then also, there's all these new things going on with the like how to raise kids. And I grew up in like corporal punishment styles things, and like, it takes all my training not to do any corporal punishment, you know um and really like try to adapt to that. But now, like, same thing, like, the training really helped. Like, for me, the training really helped with being a father. Like, first of all, we, doing as being part of like those really early part of the Atienza Kali, that we used to do a lot of like the sleep depth stuff, like sleep deprivation. So for me, not sleeping, I can live on 5 hours. Like, if I get 5 hours sleep, I'm pretty good, you know? So, and then even like, having milk ready, like that's all training, being prepared. Like, some people, like, I remember going to the hospital and people would tell me, oh, it's going to be like havoc. It's going to be crazy. But it wasn't crazy because I have all this training. Like, I knew prepare beforehand. Like when the baby cries, I have like 2 milk bottles ready. Why? Because I prepared it before. Like, why would I wait? You know? So I do all these things from training regarding like just the initial part of like raising them up was like very helpful from the training, sleep depth, being able to control your emotions, and you know uh and then like being prepared. Like, I'm just better prepared to do certain things. Like, I know how to, like, what's necessary, what's not necessary, but I think, like, again, that might sometimes conflict with what my wife thinks, right? But and then part of the training is making sure that there's a little bit of harmony in those two different thinking, right? Relationships is like one of the biggest parts of LOT, right? One of the most difficult parts of like PSP, which is which is part of psych protocols, right? Primary security protocols. So
100%.
yeah, and then training wise, I go with the same thing like Tuhon Carl's. Like, I wish I could get I want, like, when I first thought about having kids, like, I was like telling my sister, like, oh yeah, my kids, no matter, like, they're gonna be soldiers. Like, I'm gonna raise them up. They're gonna do this. And now, like, uh, I understand from training, like, and especially Tuhon Carl, that there's gonna be chaos. There's nothing perfect, and you kind of like work your way through like this chaos, right? But what is the goal? The goal is like to raise well-adjusted children, right? So that's all I try to do is kind of like do everything through that kind of filter of raising well-adjusted children, and not try to put as many hangups that I grew up with onto them, right?
100.
Yeah.
That's powerful. No, yeah, it's so true because you actually answered the question wonderfully, because I was always curious. Like, we became parents around the same time,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you have so much more reps on training LOT than I do, and so watching you going through that chapter of your life as I was going through it
Hmm.
myself, essentially, it really was inspiring to me because it gave me a reference that kind of looked. I think you and Guru Clint, San
Yeah.
Antonio, like
Clint and
both
Pete.
both of y'all, yeah, like it gave me this great image of like, okay, like this is how you apply training. And I'm still making mistakes all the time. I mean, my three boys are like, they all have different personalities. There's like Mass Attack now because there's three and there's only now. So it's like you're trying to figure out what to say and what to do with the wife and how to kind of juggle everything. But I think I can attest to that as well, just from my personal experience. Your influence in my life, the things we've had discussions when I first moved here, things I was going through, as a new dad and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You really helped me in that. So I want to say thank you in that. And
Mm-hmm.
before I wrap this up, I do want to talk, since we're talking about kids. This is how I like to end every interview. So this podcast really is for my three boys. It's for Ethan, Evan, and Elliot. And so the whole inspiration for this podcast was I wanted them to learn from the men that impacted me and inspire me. And so if my kids are of age, right, like Ethan, Evan, and Elliot, let's imagine they're behind me, and they're of age, and they ask you, what does it mean to be a man? What would you tell them?
I would say to be a man is to be a problem solver. Problem solver. And then again, having goals. Come on down here. Since we're here, come here. My daughter just walked in.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Great timing.
Yeah. And like, that's why, it's like there's a lot that goes, like, it's a very complex answer. And like, I think my first thing is to be a problem solver, because that's what Atienza is all about, right? Being a problem solver. And like, what are the problems? Like, when you have a problem, like, you have to identify what is the problem and what is your goal to, like, and then solving that part. So like, and for me, that's the first thing I always try to do, right? Like, what is the problem? And then, I still attribute it to, like, from the training, like, I don't like complain about things, right? It's just what it is. Like, this is it. Sure, you can have whatever you want. Right. So, hold on for 1 second. Got it. Yeah. So those are like the things, like, she's sorry about that, Mike. She's like,
no, this
right
is
over
my whole
here.
life.
She's like, yeah.
This is every day.
She walked in down here.
I really thought my kids haven't walked in yet, so it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, I try to, like, that's one of the things, like, the training, like, I got from Tuhon Carl's, like, how do you get the kids involved? Everything is part of life. I don't separate it. Like, this is like what we do, and this is it. Like, I recently had that discussion. Hey, hi there. Come on over here. You've been looking for me? You want to say hello? Say hi.
Hey, what's going on?
Hi there.
How are you?
Right? Say hi. That's Guru Mike. Yeah, one of these days you're gonna see him and his family.
Yeah. I got. Right? We got to get the kids together and get them a play date eventually at some point, all together.
Yeah, I think that once we get, like, we'll really have to have like one of probably a call, like something really, like, all the families, like, together.
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be like pretty
big
cool.
daycare. We just have like a daycare area, like, just for all the kids. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, let me leave you with this. I know time's running out, but like, one of the things, like, Tuhon Carl mentioned, like, like, one of the things that he was talking about, like, when he thinks of, like, what people consider the high seat of the table, like, of the high ranks of, like, and different cultures have it differently. But what he thinks of, like, when he thinks of, like, of Atienza Kali and like the high rank table, it's really like a family table. It's like everybody in the living room, like trays of like folding TV, TV trays, and like, and the fireplace, and just like people hang out with their families. That's what he wants it to, and he's always wanted to be like that. So, I think, like, even though they don't have their own family, like, it's part of the system. Yes, hi. Yeah.
No, 100%. I agree with that, because I mean, obviously, like, this is really great that your kids and your family kind of ran in there, because I think that's part of it. Like, one of the things that Tuhon Carl taught me when I first started, before I was even dating anyone, was like, always keep your family around when you're training. Keep them around when you're doing cool things like this. Keep them around, because they're part of everything. and you just involve
Yeah.
them in everything. You're actually a you always told me that as well. That was one of the things you taught me. So I really do appreciate you. Hi.
Yeah. No
Hi.
problem.
How are you?
Hey,
How old? She's 8. She's 7 or 8.
Simona is 5.
Oh, 5. Okay, I'm losing. My
Yeah.
son's 7, so I just thought they were like the same age. Yeah, that all the years are blurring. But
Yes,
Tuhon Leo, thank you
yes.
so much for joining me. And thank you so
No
much for
problem.
sharing this.
It's important what you're talking about, and
Thank
I
you.
see that more and more so, not in our generations. Like, I really feel like the future generations, they have a lot where they're not getting that kind of like that toughness that they need, and that could
100%.
be, they could be, that's a lot of factors going into that, like the like technology for everything, like PC stuff. But like, I know a lot of my younger relatives, they're nowhere where I was at that time frame. Maybe they're smarter, maybe they're more capable in sense of technology, but like they have a hard time, like with regular things.
No, 100%. And again, you're the ones, honestly, you, Tuan Carl, like all the older brothers in the tribe have made me who I am now. And so I thank you for not only your time today, but thank you for making me the guy I am today, and
That's
for
awesome.
inspiring me to be a better dad and a better husband. And I definitely want to make sure that we all get together. I'll try to bring my kids up to call with the wife,
Yeah,
and we'll all get together.
yeah.
So, but you have a
Well, like
great
you said,
weekend.
yeah,
Yeah, let me
you
know.
too. All right, thank you very much, Mike.